Hey AP Psych students, thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are going to get started looking at an introduction to your free response question. So this is going to be a great video to kind of just help you get your feet wet and get familiarized with everything you're going to be asked to do on your AP Psych test as far as the free response questions go. So let's get started. Alright, so what is the free response section on your AP test? I know that a lot of you have taken an AP test before, but it looks a little bit different on the AP Psych test. So you are going to have just 50 minutes to answer 2 free response questions. This means that you should average about 25 minutes per question. These questions are kind of long and they ask you to do a lot of things. So you're going to be defining a lot of different concepts, looking at data, and just a lot of little things that add up to one big question. So one thing to keep in mind here is that you are not writing a full-on essay here. In a lot of your other AP classes, you're writing pages and pages as fast as you can. Here, you need to think more paragraphs. So just little chunks of paragraphs that stack up to each other. You are not going to be writing an introduction. You are not going to be writing a conclusion. Do not waste your time or the grader's precious time on doing that. Just writing in paragraphs. So there are 2 types of questions on your AP Psych exam. One question will be about concept applications, and basically that means they're going to give you a scenario and you're going to have to apply some of the concepts and terms that you've learned this year to that scenario. The second type of question will be a research question. And with these research questions, you're going to be given a set of data and be asked to interpret that and kind of just talk about what the researchers found. These questions together are going to represent 33% of your total score. And so by default, that means that your multiple choice section is going to represent 66% of your total score. So while this free response section isn't worth as much as some other AP classes you may have been in, this is a really important section to do well on because you can rack up points like crazy that will boost your score. And if you're already at a 3, you want to be at a 4. If you're already at a 4, you want to be at a 5. And so this is a great place to really push you over the edge to that great score you need to get college credit. So let's look at some of our rules here. So one really big thing to keep in mind is that AP graders will not look at anything that is in a list format. You need to be writing in complete sentences. If your response looks like an outline or it just looks like a list of bullet points, AP graders are not going to grade that, even if your information is correct. You have to be writing in complete sentences. Again, not an essay format, but it can't just be like a list. Alright, so let's look at our first type of question, which is a concept application question, or a CAQ, as you will see it modified in a lot of your teacher modifications. So these type of questions are testing your ability to define, explain, and apply concepts to a scenario. So most of these questions are going to look just like what you see here. You're going to see a paragraph and then a list of terms. And basically what you're doing is applying this list of terms to the scenario outlined in your paragraph. So let's take a look at this one and see how we would answer it. Sachio traveled to a prestigious college to audition for a music scholarship. After he arrived, he learned that his audition had been rescheduled for late in the day. Sachio was required to play several difficult pieces on his saxophone and interview with the judges. Just before leaving campus, he was offered a full scholarship to the college. Explain how each of the following might have contributed to the success of Sachio's visit. Then you see a list of concepts and terms that we've talked about throughout the semester. So your goal with these free response questions is to rack up as many points as possible. As you get more familiar with these free response questions, you will be able to identify how many possible points you can get for each free response question. So let's look at how many points are possible with this question. So as you see, each bullet point is going to be 1 point that you can earn for a total of 7 possible points. So in order to get those points, you need to be explaining how each of the following have contributed to the success of Seishio's visit. So you're focusing on the success here. You don't want to talk about what may have stressed him out or contradict anything that did happen in this scenario. So if you look, since we have 7 possible points, you have 25 minutes for this question, divided by 7 points. That means you're going to be looking at 3.5 minutes per point. So that's not a lot of time. So you just need to go very quickly, explain each of the following concepts and apply it to the scenario, and then move on. And just keep a pretty good pace going. You don't have to particularly answer these in any order, so it's not like you have to go in the order these concepts are outlined in. What I would do if I was taking the test is do the ones that I know very well first. So if I know implicit memory really well, I'm like, yes, we just studied that, I know what this is, I might start there, cross it off my list, and just go down the list. Another thing to keep in mind here is that let's say you totally forgot what intrinsic motivation is, and you're like, oh no, I know that we studied this, but I cannot remember what it is, and even if I could remember what it is, I do not know how this applied to Seishio's situation. Totally fine. That's just 1 point. You can still get the other 6 points. Another good thing about these is that you do not get points taken away for wrong answers. So it's really in your best interest to give it a good try so that you can maybe get the point. But also don't panic if you don't know one of these, because you still have an opportunity for 6 other points. So let's look at what you need to do to earn each of these points on these CAQs. So we're just going to be looking at the first bullet point here, which was the resistance phase of general adaptation syndrome. So we're just going to look at what your individual paragraph response would be to get point number 1. And then once you get the hang of that, you can go through and practice how you would get point number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So to earn that point, you must explain how Seishio's heightened or stabilized physiological arousal, maybe like his sympathetic nervous system, energy, or adrenaline, contributes to a specific successful outcome. The most important thing to remember here is that you need to be specific. You need to both define the term, so you need to define the resistance phase, and you need to apply it to Seishio's situation. You will not earn points if you are vague. So if you only define the resistance phase of GAS, then you're not going to get points because you haven't addressed all parts of the question. You need to really explain how this affects Seishio's situation. You also need to be specific. If you just say that Seishio was nervous or his stress levels were high and so that caused something to happen, that's not good enough because anyone could figure that out just from reading the scenario. You need to really prove to your grader that you took AP Psychology and you paid attention this year. So let's look at a good student response to this question. This is a student that got the point for the resistance phase of adaptation syndrome section. They got this 1 point. So they said, the resistance phase of general adaptation syndrome follows alarm and is a period of level-headedness even though physiological stress is still present in the body, detectable by the person or not. Upon being told of his reschedule, Seishio may have entered the alarm phase. However, by the time of his actual audition, he had reached resistance, which caused him to experience a calm or riding the high-like state, which could have led to his success while performing. Boom. This answer got the full point, and they can move on. So let's look at what this example did so well. So the first thing you see them do is they defined what the resistance phase is. That's what's highlighted here in yellow. It's the level-headedness that you experience after the alarm phase. And then they give you an example. They tie in Seishio and what happened to him as their example. You kind of see that here in blue. And this student also does a really good job connecting this to relevant information. And what that means is they tied in outside information that wasn't given to them in the prompt. So you see how they connect the alarm phase in here? They're saying Satio probably did experience alarm, which comes before resistance. And so they're just kind of showing their grader that they really know their stuff. They're saying, yes, I know what happens in general adaptation syndrome. I know that you go from alarm to resistance. They proved that to their grader, so that's just really solidifying that they're going to get their point here. And then they also show and describe the concept. So here in orange, where he says by the time of his actual audition, he had reached resistance, which caused him to experience a calm or riding the high-like state. They're very specific here. They're kind of painting this picture for the grader. The grader can see exactly what must have happened to Satio and how this particular concept applied to help Satio do well in his audition and be successful. So again, this is only like 3 sentences, and this will get you your 1 point for the resistance phase. So you just need to do that 6 more times for the other terms, and then you would get all 7 of your points. Again, if you don't know one of the terms, that's okay. You can skip it if you're short on time, or you can take your best guess. Whatever you do is totally up to you. Let's move on to our research questions. For these, you'll be given data from some form of research, an experiment, survey, case study, something like that, and you'll be assessed on your mastery of analyzing research studies. So you're going to be given a set of data and asked to interpret it, basically. So let's look at what this looks like. So you'll see right off the bat that we have a part A and a part B. You have to address both sections of this. This isn't a pick one. You have to answer all parts. And so when we break this down to see our possible points, you will see again, every bullet point listed is going to get you a point here. So if you miss a bullet point, that's a point you don't get, just like in the CAQs. So let's just focus on part A here. Part A says explain how each of the following plays a role in eating behavior, and then it lists out drive reduction theory, external cues, dopamine in the reward center, and observational learning. So part A, you're going to do a lot like what you did with the CAQs. You're going to have 4 paragraphs that explain how each of these concepts plays a role in eating behavior. So let's look at an exemplar example of part A. So just looking at our first bullet point there of drive reduction theory and how to get that 1 point, here is a great example. Drive reduction theory states that we are motivated to reduce a drive or physical need. With eating behavior, we are motivated to eat because we are hungry. By eating, we reduce the drive of hunger. Since we satisfied our hunger, we stop eating. Boom, that's how you get 1 point on part A. Not a whole lot of writing here either. So your job here is to define drive reduction theory and then explain how it affects eating behavior. You do that for all the concepts listed and you're going to get 4 points right off the bat. So again, not the hardest thing that it's asking you to do, but let's look at a bad example of part A. So this is an example that did not get the point. They said drive reduction theory states that people are driven to do certain actions based on the events that may occur when they complete the action. What's wrong here? Why didn't they get their point? Well, they didn't relate it back to the prompt, right? They don't mention anything about hunger and how drive reduction theory plays a role in hunger, right? They didn't apply that at all, so they didn't get their point. Even though they did define drive reduction theory correctly, they didn't do what the question asked them to do by applying it to hunger. So just make sure you do both parts there, and you'll be able to get your points, no problem here. So let's look at part B. So part B, you are given a set of data and a research study is explained. For here, we see that a study was conducted to investigate the role of framing on concern for healthy eating. Each participant was randomly assigned to one of 2 conditions. In the first condition, the participants read an article indicating that obesity is a disease. Participants in the second condition read an article indicating that obesity was a result of personal behaviors and decisions. Participants were then asked to indicate how important it would be for them to eat a healthy diet. Scores range from 1, not very important, to 9, very important. The results are presented in the table below. And so if you look at this table, take a moment, look at that data. But the conclusion you should reach here is that those who were given the pamphlet that obesity is a result of a behavior thought that it was more important to eat a healthy diet or had more concern for eating healthy than those who thought it was a disease. And so just keep that in mind as you're kind of rolling through these questions. And then you'll see your 3 questions listed down here. You are asked to operationally define the dependent variable, what makes the study experimental rather than correlational, and what is the most appropriate conclusion the researchers can draw about the relationship between the variables in the study. So pretty straightforward questions here. As long as you kind of remember your terminology and you remember how to interpret a study, you're going to get these points no problem. And so let's look at an exemplar example of response to Part B. So again, not a very long response for 3 whole questions, right? So this student said, in the study, each participant got an article on obesity and whether it was a behavior or a disease. The dependent variable in the study is which article the person received. Okay, awesome. They've answered the first question there. They've identified the dependent variable. This study is experimental because the researchers are attempting to change the participants' decisions before they score themselves. It would be correlational if the participants weren't asked to read something. Okay, boom, they've answered their second bullet point. They've said the study is experimental, they've explained why, and they also went the other step to explain what would make it correlational, just to really make sure they get their point here. And then here they answer their third question. Researchers can conclude that if I'm told that obesity comes from my decisions and behavior, then I will believe that I can help protect myself from that by eating healthy. However, if I'm told that it is a disease, then I'm going to think there's nothing I can do to help it or fix it, so I might as well give up and eat whatever I please. This framing affects my concern for eating healthy. Awesome answer here to answer number 3. They use an if-then statement to kind of drive their point home about what the researchers can conclude about this study. They notice that they do it both ways, right? They can conclude that if I'm given this pamphlet, I'll think one thing, and if I'm given the other pamphlet, I'll think a different thing. They also kind of take this extra step here, saying this framing affects the individual's concern for healthy eating, and that just really solidifies that they're going to get their point here. This is an awesome student response to Part B. And so as you see, these questions aren't particularly hard. You just kind of have to know your stuff, but the actual writing out of the answers isn't super tricky at all. You just got to prove that you know what you're talking about. So just some side notes to leave you with. Grammar and spelling, handwriting, those don't really matter that much as long as it's legible and they can still tell what you are trying to say. They understand that you are incredibly crunched for time, so don't feel like you need to write really slowly in the most beautiful handwriting. They understand it's going to be a little messy. Another note, you have to write in pen. So if you have to cross something out, just do so with a single strikeout. Don't spend a ton of time trying to black it out so they can't see your wrong thoughts. They are not going to take the time to try to figure out what's underneath your strikeout, so just don't waste your time doing that. Also, something to keep in mind is that guessing can't hurt you. You are not penalized for wrong answers. So if you have a general idea of what a term is, you might as well try to apply it to whatever scenario you're in so that you can maybe get those points. It's better to try than not, especially if you end up with a little bit of extra time once you're done writing out the answers you do know. The biggest note here, though, is do not contradict yourself. If you say one thing about the way that a research study should have been interpreted, and then you contradict yourself, you will not get the point. So pick a side and stick with it throughout your whole response. Alright guys, we're going to practice more with these in live lesson and throughout the course. but this is just a great video to kind of help you get your feet wet and get used to these free response questions. Text me, webmail me if you have any concerns, but I hope this video was helpful.